This was the best value for money graphics card back in 2016, the GTX 1060 6GB unit, and it remains relevant nearly 10 years later. For just 320 euros here in Spain or $300 in the US, it directly competed with the flagship of the previous generation, the GTX 980, which was double the price of this one. For Nvidia that made no sense, and they have been careful to ensure it doesn't happen again. In that time, this mid-tier graphics card started to redefine what was possible to do without spending a fortune. In fact, the 1060 was so good that Nvidia started getting rid of SLI in this generation, because for half the price of a GTX 1080 you could buy two 1060s and achieve the same performance. Even though it's also true that there were other problems related to this, as micro-stuttering and the lack of support around a lot of titles, since it was complicated and expensive for the developers to create games that supported this kind of technology. Today you can buy one of these for just 50 euros on the second-hand market, and I just happened to have one lying around in a mini computer collecting dust, so I decided to pull it out and give it a try. Specifically, this unit is the EVGA Superclocked Edition, the mini ITX unit. Inside we find power from the Pascal architecture, no components dedicated to AI or ray tracing. It features 1280 CUDA cores in a 16nm manufacturing process. This results in a total of 4.69 teraflops, making it almost 3 times better than consoles of the time. As for memory, it still holds up among today's standards. 2 versions were released, and the 6GB unit was everyone's favorite, because on the other hand, the one with the 3GB also came with a reduction in CUDA cores that had a direct impact on performance. So we are going to exclude the 3GB unit from the rest of the video. So this one even came with very low power consumption, almost half of AMD competition unit with the RX 580. It's a shame that EVGA no longer makes these small models, neither do GPUs, which in some ways remind me of the Founder Edition style, a design with grey tones, black, and overall a very clean aesthetic. So I wanted to check if 8 years later is it still worth picking one up. While its HDMI is 2.0 and has some limitations, it still features DisplayPort 1.4, the same standard found in today's graphics cards. So I used the DisplayPort to this 240Hz 1440p LED IPS monitor I'm currently testing, but for the benchmark we will stick to 1080p resolution. Without any issues we can play now Battlefield 1 maxed out with an average of around 90 FPS, and with minor tweaks we could easily achieve more competitive frame rates. Inside Battlefield 2042 it's also playable, though now with settings set on low, maintaining above 60 FPS. Games like Overwatch are a breeze running at over 200 on medium settings, so esports titles that require fewer resources won't pose any problems. Even in Fortnite with DirectX 11 on high settings we still get a decent frame rate, and if we decide to take advantage of the 240Hz monitor, setting it to low with DirectX 11, we will hit those numbers, and input lag is significantly reduced. Current updates in technology still help this old GPU. While Nvidia decided that DLSS is only compatible with its more recent models, AMD FSR and Intel remain tools that can help us achieve better performance in AAA titles. For example, in Cyberpunk 2077, where they allow us to hit the 60 FPS mark. There's nothing else on the market at this price point. Even so many years later, if we compare it to its current counterpart, the 4060, it still seems like a bargain. I got this 4060 for 300 euros and 8 years of development have only added 2GB of VRAM. There's nothing else on the market at this price point. Even so many years later, if we compare it to its current counterpart, the 4060, it still seems like a bargain. I got this 4060 for 300 euros, and 8 years later the development have only added 2GB of VRAM, with performance in most games excluding DLSS being double or in some cases triple, but of course it costs 6 times as much. So maths are pretty easy here. Today the 1060 still seems like a fantastic option for building a very budget-friendly system, or even for those simply looking to add a dedicated GPU to move away from integrated graphics and handle more intensive tasks in 3D scenarios that often demand raw power. This was the last GTX where Nvidia focused on giving us raw power instead of ray tracing, AI, or technologies that, while improving performance, they do so artificially, sometimes interfering with the game in some way, such as adding input lag or visual artifacts. That's why it's no surprise that this graphics card remains high on Steam's user statistics. It's still very much alive today and capable of running every game I've tested on it. So if you're considering getting one, I don't think you'll go wrong. The numbers speak for themselves.